Hello there. What is going on, everybody? We are on board the bridge of the Starship Enterprise, NCC 1701D, and I am joined today by two legends of tabletop gaming, Max Brooke and Michael Gernes. How are you both doing today?
Good, good. Yeah,
Yeah.
enjoying summer, looking forward to talking about this game.
Yes, and so if you guys are watching, if you're wondering why I don't have the Star Destroyer background, if you're wondering why it's not a Star Wars video today, we are talking about the latest and greatest, the new hotness coming out from WizKids and designed by these two guys. It's Star Trek Into the Unknown. If you've been following my channel, you've heard me talk about it. But before, instead of me talking about it, I want these guys to talk about it. So Max and Michael, let's, in your own words, what's the elevator pitch? What would you say to somebody who hasn't heard of Star Trek Into the Unknown?
Yeah, so thanks so much for having us on.
Thank you.
So this is a miniatures game of exploration, diplomacy, and conflict. And at a high level, we really want a game of it to capture the feel of an episode of Star Trek.
Yeah, awesome. Having looked at the demo kit, it definitely seems like it can do so much. I have a ton of questions about this game because so little is really known right now, and has led to so much speculation. Now, is this a two-player game, or does it support more than two players?
Initially, two.
Oh,
But
I like
we
that.
have plans. We have plans to eventually allow for multiplayer.
That's exciting. I love that, and I feel like that's something that a lot of tabletop, especially games with miniatures, don't always support. And I really wish, especially when you have like game night and you have three people show up, it's a very cool thing. So you guys have both worked on a lot of popular games, games that I've talked about, games like X-Wing and Armada. Based on your experience, especially with space games, what have you done differently this time? I know that's a loaded question. There's a lot of potential answers there.
Yeah. So let's. Well, Mike, you have a thing you've mentioned a couple times that I really like about
Yeah.
this.
Well, one thing that we did. Uh, this is one of the first games I've definitely been co-designer on, and we sat down and we had a lot of discussions about what is Star Trek and what kind of experience do we want? How do we want to translate the themes of Star Trek into what is going to be a fleet game? Um, and I heard a great quote years ago, and it was somebody who said, "In Star Trek, you win by understanding."
Mm.
And so we talked about, the idea that like Star Trek isn't just like we didn't feel like we wanted this to be just purely a war game, but to allow for conflict in multiple dimensions
Okay. Okay.
and resolution of conflict and especially emergent narrative.
All right. Excellent. So,
Yeah.
okay, Max, what do you
So
have more?
to build on that a
Yeah.
little bit, yeah. One of the ideas we really tried to seed in here was that this is a game where you're going to be engaging competitively with an opponent, and combat is always on the table to some degree. But depending on the scenario, you have other tools you might use. And so we wanted to really look at diplomacy and exploration as sort of the other pillars of the game as these tools that you can use in what is still a competitive two-player miniatures game.
Okay.
So we kind of cast a wide net in terms of mechanical themes we wanted to encompass there, because Star Trek episodes can go in so many different ways.
Very cool. It sounds very exciting to me. I want to have a couple of questions about miniatures. So, the scale. I know a lot of people have asked: is these the same miniatures? Are these just repainted attack wing miniatures? Because there were some questions about scale with that game. Can we talk about the scale? Is this a 1-to-1 scale, or is it a sliding scale? Can you talk about the miniatures themselves?
Yeah, so the miniatures are, I believe they're all currently scaled to each other without any sort of sliding scale.
Mm-hmm.
Whether that persists indefinitely into the future kind of depends on how many ships get made, which ships get made, etc. So there might at some point be a soft scale for production necessity reasons, or a soft sliding scale, depending on the ships you want to make. There are some really cool ships that are also very big and maybe not feasible to put into people's hands at the actual size they represent. But if you compare these to the attack wing minis, the Defiant is actually a little bit smaller than the attack wing Defiant, but more detailed. Meanwhile, the Galaxy class is much bigger.
Yeah, I've seen I've seen a couple. I've seen a lot of photos of the Galaxy class, and of course I've had my hands on the Defiant, and I've definitely noticed that the miniatures quality is very, very high. It's very up there. It looks absolutely incredible, and that's awesome. And I know there's probably a ton of folks that went into making that happen. So pass on my congratulations to them. So far, it looks absolutely fantastic. I want to ask about expansions because I know there's been some, there's been some rumors. There's been some things confirmed that there will be expansions, but what can fans look forward to in terms of more ships? Like, oh, I hope they are going to have this ship. Are they going to have that ship? Is there anything that we can kind of that you can speak to with that?
Well, we're definitely, any of the really recognizable, dare I say, iconic ships that you've seen in Star Trek shows and movies from this era, they're all on the list. It's a matter of when. Sometimes we have to space things out, no pun intended.
Yeah.
For reasons of line planning. I think Max can maybe elaborate a little bit more about our strategy for how the expansions will work.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
So one of the core ideas that Alex Davey and Brian Kinsella had, even as we were joining the project in the earliest stages, one of the things they really outlined that they wanted to see was a strong campaign integration, campaign focus. So while we tried to design the game to be flexible to support event play, to support, casual pickup play, to support campaign play, the products are kind of all organized around a campaign. And the first campaign is the Dominion War. And we actually begin before the Dominion War has formally been declared. We begin at the outset of the conflict, sort of in that, period where things are, hostile, but still tense. It looks like there might, it's unclear exactly how things are going to break down. Other factions are beginning to get involved. So each expansion is sort of like 3 or 4 episodes of missions, and it includes characters who are relevant to that and factions who are relevant to that. And it'll add on. But, if we were to play the campaign, you and I could sit down and play the core set campaign. And that is a contained arc of the campaign. And then each product adds another arc of a couple more missions that we can play. And you and I could play that. We could switch out who's playing which faction, or we could have Michael join us and play another faction, and one of us could take on a faction that is sort of in the background playing incident missions. So it's designed to be flexible for playing with just 2 people if you want, or you can scale up to more people, especially as there are more factions available. And you can even swap factions around. I could play Federation in the first one, and you could say, "Oh, looks really cool. I'll take the Federation for the second arc," and we switch. So
and different arcs, different factions may get the spotlight in different arcs.
Oh, very cool. Now, you said about the campaign in the core set. Now, is as new expansions come out, let's say I get another ship, or a year down the road I've got more ships, but I want to go back and play that core set campaign. Can I do it again with different ships this time, as long as it's still like Federation ships?
Yes, some of the missions prescribe specifically what you have to take, especially the early missions where we're teaching you the game, because the first couple missions also serve as a tutorial to a lot of the mechanics. This is no big spoiler, but this is a very heavy game, and that was part of the design spec. It was WizKids already had Attack Wing, and they wanted something that was totally other end of the spectrum. That just dripped with Star Trek theme and got into, you know, all the things you'd expect in a Star Trek game, whether that be away teams or probes or torpedoes that you can interact with. So this game has a lot of mechanics, and as a result, we wanted to sort of slow roll those over the core box. So the first mission, you know, you start out flying the Defiant around and learning the basic mechanics, and then the next mission adds in some more stuff. But you know, by the later missions, even in the first arc, by the third and fourth mission in the first arc, and then in the subsequent arcs, you'll have more choice over what you have a lot of the time. But other times we might say, oh, we specifically want you to take this ship. So it varies.
Okay, excellent, great answer. Thank you so much. Let's talk about. I want to go back to something we talked about just before we started recording, because you mentioned Alex Davey, great guy, and I remember talking to him. He was the first name I saw like initially attached to this game. Can you talk a little bit about you know, how, you know, the inception of the project, I guess?
Yeah. So very early on, Alex reached out. Sorry. A little space distortion.
And so, are we under attack?
Just a little bit of a wormhole effect. I didn't get air ramped, so we're not under attack. Alex and Brian Kinsella, who was, I believe, COO of WizKids at the time, had a concept for a Star Trek game that was a fleet-based game with a heavy campaign element. And, you know, Alex said, okay, I want to find some people to design this. And Alex reached out, and, you know, I talked to him initially. And then I said, I think if I'm going to do this, you know, I can't do it alone. I need someone else. And Michael's the best pick. And then we started. And that was where we basically put together a pitch deck of like, okay, we have your basic vision of, you know, the overall scope. But like, what is the game really going to look like? What is the product here? And so, you know, we've been there since those early conversations, but Alex and Brian did a lot of the vision setting of the, like, you know, and, you know, we'd give them a pitch deck, and they'd say, oh, we like this, we want to push this in this other direction. So it's, you know, we had a great team of people who really understood Star Trek and miniatures games production from the start.
Oh, yeah.
And then of course we got John Schaefer partway through, which was just a huge boon. He's been fantastic, and lots of great people on the team.
No, and it does seem like everything I've seen coming out of WizKids lately, it seems like so many familiar names and really great folks that really make me optimistic. And I know a lot of the people I talk to also share that optimism based on the track history of so many excellent folks like yourselves. So, you know, I got to say, you know, I don't want to, you know, speak for all of my viewers, but I think we're really looking forward to this. So, although I am going to probably speak for the people who are watching this, because I think if they're watching this right now, they're probably, you know, that's probably at least half the reason. So, I had, and I remember the last time I had you guys on, you had mentioned this too, just that, you know, I had said like, hey, you guys, you know, Alex Davey is over at WizKids right now, and they have the Star Trek. You guys should go, you know, make a Star Trek game over there with WizKids, and you weren't able to talk about it at the time. But I was
going to say, go back and watch our poker faces in the clip, and you can see all our tells.
There's a lot of nodding and like, oh yeah, that's a good idea.
I'm gonna do that as soon as we're done here.
I remember vividly your idea for three-dimensional space combat with the rotating ship pegs, which was very cool, and we had some other considerations that maybe we'll get into later. Yeah. But I remember you mentioned that, and I was like, that is really cool. If we were doing like a two-ship battle with like the big pegs, that could be, you know, Battle of Mutara Nebula. That could be really neat.
I imagine that would increase the production cost, not fairly well.
I think it would be a different game. I loved that idea. The tricky part about it is as soon as you introduce a third object, it gets very tricky.
I can see that. Yeah. So a little bit more about the ships and the miniatures, since I guess kind of a good segue. It looks like these are pre-painted, pre-assembled miniatures, which is strange to me because I've recently been told that that's impossible to do anymore. But somehow you guys managed to do it. But is this what we can expect for future expansions as well? I mean, I know you can't speak for the forever future, but is that the plan? Is that all the expansions are also going to be pre-painted and pre-assembled?
Everything we're working on right now, that's sort of the operating assumption. Sure. But, you know, I know WizKids is very, you know, like they explore a lot of options for products, and they're, you know, they do a lot of great R&D and things like that. And so, you know, I mean, every time I go into my main friendly local game store, I see that huge wall of the Nalsder's D&D minis.
Yes.
And I know that they did some primed unpainted ships for Attack Wing too. The deep cuts, I think. Maybe they
deep
weren't
cuts. And
the
those are
deep
very
cuts,
good.
yeah.
I picked up the Deep
Yeah.
Space Nine miniature from there, as well as a couple of D&D minis. But and those are really nice. And I think it's cool that they offer options for folks
Yeah.
who may want to paint their stuff and want it just primed. So
I have no idea if that's coming or not. That's sort of beyond our scope.
sure.
But I'd buy them. It'd be cool.
Yeah, no, that sounds like it would be cool. So I want to talk a little bit about like ship expansions because one of the things I've noticed from early looks at this is that you guys are doing crew. Crew are going to be a very important part of the ships, which of course that does sound exactly like what a Star Trek game would have. Are ship expansions going to come with their own crew, or do you have plans for like separate like card-based crew packs, or maybe, can you talk a little bit about that?
Right now, the forthcoming expansions are all planned to have officers.
Okay.
So like if you're Federation, you can get new officers and also new ships. If you're one of the new factions that are being introduced, then you are going to be, you'll have the officers you need to start play.
Excellent. And it does seem like these officers are sort of taking the place of, how some miniatures games will have like upgrades, and you can take like this, this big cannon that you're putting on your ship, and it seems like it's less about like adding phasers to ships, but rather adding somebody like Worf who's really good with those phasers. Is that kind of how this game is going to approach, I would say, upgrades?
Well, so we need to take a step back here, actually, because the game has a little bit of a different paradigm around list building than you may be used to.
I have questions about that as well, but
yeah,
we can get into it right now.
Maybe we'll cover some of your other ones here too.
It's
That's
kind of
perfectly
dovetail.
okay.
So, at the outset, the first choice you make actually is not what ships you're going to field. It is specifically which 5 officers from your faction are your core officers. And your core officers are kind of the main characters who are in focus for the episode you're playing. Now they're not all named characters. There are also, we have, Jean-Luc Picard and Benjamin Sisko and Worf, but we also have, Scholarly Doctor and, Vorda Supervisor and such. So there's room to sort of make up your own characters as well with sort of more generic options. But regardless of whether they're a big name or, a red shirt, they're who's in focus. And you spend the bulk of your points on those officers, actually. So ships can have a points cost, but that points cost is actually deducted from the flex points, which are whatever you didn't spend on officers. So let's say you have 50 points, you spend 45 on officers, you have 5 flex points remaining. That means that if you want to select a ship that is, like more powerful than most ships of its class, like the Defiant is a scout class ship, but is very powerful, it might incur a cost. If you want to select a ship that's weaker than its class, it actually might grant you extra points to play with. And that's because when ship selection actually happens is after mission has been determined. Now, in an event, you'll know what you need to bring with you, but you get the mission, and then you have a chance to pick which ships will fill out the slots available for that mission. So many of the missions in the core set say you can have a capital ship, and then any 2 of a scout, specialist, or support ship. So you can't have 99 99 Jem'Hadar fighters just because their cost is zero.
That was definitely one of my questions. Is I noticed the 0, and I'm like, okay, I'm gonna MSU this thing up. Yeah, no, that's awesome.
So that's a baseline.
Yeah. So that determines how many things you'll have. Now there might be various things that can occur. You might get reinforcements during the mission. And again, for an event, we're going to have some guidance on how to know what you'll want to bring with you. But yeah, your main list building that you would lock in before an event would be your core officers, your ship pool, which is the ships you have available to choose from, and you choose on a mission by mission basis, and your transfer officers, who are sort of like the guest stars of the episode you're playing. And transfer officers are also your chance to bring in people from out of faction if you have sway with those factions among your core officers. They're your chance to splash in sort of specialist characters. And you don't always know exactly which of your transfer officers you're going to have access to. You have a transfer pool, but you there's a little bit of almost a drafting mini game at the beginning where you have a chance to get some of them and choose if you want to spend your flux points on them or not.
And a lot of the inspiration for this actually came from the show and from like episodes. If you remember the episode of Next Generation where they, the Federation kind of like they set up a net to make sure that the Romulans can't intervene in the Klingon Civil War. And one of the things that struck me about that one is like they're not actually worried about ships. They're worried about enough officers and officers being able to command those ships, and that kind of became a real seed for this game.
I love that. That's just a great way to kind of set the phasers for stunning. That's a great anecdote for this, because I think that really kind of summarizes what you guys have been talking about, and that does say a lot. Now, Max, you mentioned sway and talking about factions, and that's definitely one of those things I wanted to look at. I've seen Benjamin Sisko, for example, having the Bajor, which of course I'm a big fan of Deep Space Nine. It's my favorite Star Trek, and that says a lot, because I definitely love Next Generation, and so like this game seems like it's hit me in the sweet spot for sure. But before I gush too much about Star Trek, if I wanted to run like Ferengi someday, could I run like a combined fleet, or is sway more for officers, or does it also allow for ships, like a ship joining? Because there's some cases where that happens.
Yeah. Well, there's the episode where during the engage. Oh, what's that one called, Mike? I'm sure you remember the name. They have the engagement with the Romulans, and Worf. Worf calls in a couple of Klingon birds of prey to help them.
Yeah, that's the defector, I think.
The defector, yes, that's right. So taking inspiration from an episode like that, one of the things we said was, okay, we know we're going to have a lot of factions in this game because there are a lot of factions in the setting. And we said, well, what if we treated our factions a little bit less like typical war game factions and a little bit more almost like a color pie? They are factions. You choose one at the outset. That is your main faction. Some officers are dual faction, though, like Worf dips into multiple factions. And then other officers like Sisko have sway. So Sisko has sway with Bajorans. And yeah, you can use sway to get officers, but if you have enough of it, you can also use sway to get ships of various types. And so that's part of how you'll know, sort of like what you'll need to bring to the event is you might, if you have Worf and Jadzia, you might have a decent bit of Klingon sway built up, and you might say, I'm actually going to bring a Klingon ship with me to the event, because if I get a battle scenario, I might decide I want to call some Klingon friends in. So there's a little bit of that sort of like list building around the mission, list building at the table, from a like pre-selected set of what's available to you.
That sounds really cool. And I imagine, now this is getting into spoiler territory, but I imagine you said that there's also some like sort of generic or unnamed officers, but it kind of allows you to kind of make your own episodes of like, okay, I want to do, like, maybe you could potentially make a generic officer that has Betazoid sway or Vulcan sway, and now all of a sudden or Romulan sway to kind of play out this episode differently. What if the Romulans helped the Federation? Of course.
Yeah. There's a lot of possibilities there. Plus, taking characters who weren't in the various episodes. Most of our story missions, the missions in that make up the campaign, are they're not direct remakes of episodes, but they're usually pretty closely based on some episode or a combination of a couple episodes or the concept of an episode with a twist. We want them to really feel like playing through a season of Star Trek as you play through the campaign. And so, with that in mind, sometimes you can change things up just by having a different person available. And suddenly it's like, oh, I have Sisko instead of Picard. He's going to punch Q instead of playing his game.
I'm not Picard. Oh, God. Great episode. Okay, so you kind of already answered this one already. I was going to ask if the game only takes place during the Dominion War, but you mentioned that's kind of just the first chapter. Is there any other hints on other stuff that we might see? Yeah, like mirror universe or the original series, or can we what kind of what time periods are or is there any that are off the table, or how much can you say about that?
Well, I think the best way to think about this game right now is the Dominion War is the overall era, or that we're trying to cover, but we're flexible enough that it's really all of 90s Star Trek right now. So there'll be characters that really show up in Next Generation, potentially characters that show up later in Voyager, but they're all, we know people want to be able to play with the things they want together that overlapped, even if they're not in like a canon accurate timeline. For example, the Enterprise D and the Defiant don't show up in battle together. But so I think that's kind of like the first thing I could say is like you'll see characters from like across that era.
Okay.
As far as future eras, one of the great things about Star Trek is time travel and alternate dimensions. So everything's on the table.
Oh, very cool.
Yeah. And in terms of the ships, just because I know some people have asked about this. So, for the ship display, the big, board with the dials on it, those are always the class of ship. And then we have various titles provided. So if you want to do something that is very like timeline specific, you can just choose what you take. And, don't take the Enterprise title, take a different title for your Galaxy class or no title or what have you.
Right. Oh, wonderful.
So there's, we wanted to provide people the sort of flexibility there to like play with the fun toys they want, but also, if people want to be a little bit more recreationist about it, they can like to be like, okay, this was exactly what was at this engagement. I'll take just that stuff.
So you're talking about titles. You kind of this is good to overlap into the next question because so titles are going to be a thing, and it's not just hey, this is the Defiant, as there could be generic Defiant classes, or I could run the Yamato instead of the Enterprise or something like that, provided that title happens to exist. And so the nods, we kind of already answered that, so that's exciting. Now let's see. I want to talk about a little bit with mechanics. From some early descriptions, it definitely seems like cloaking is going to be a part of the game. We can probably expect that Klingons are going to show up in a Star Trek game at some point. Romulans too, but also the Defiant, being in the core set, is known to have cloaked, depending on which Defiant it is, depending on in the timeline. So can you tell us a little bit about how cloaking will work in Star Trek Into the Unknown?
Yes. So this is actually a good opportunity for us to address something that I wanted to make sure we talked about, which is just to rip the Band-Aid now, cloaking is not in the core set. The back of the box, a very early version of the back of the box, got put up by accident on the WizKids site that said it included the stealth trackers. But unfortunately, that was like super duper early before we had locked final components. So that is going to appear in the first expansion. And this is for two reasons. One, we were concerned that we were going to be overwhelming people with mechanics as we sort of finalized those core set missions. We realized, we really need to teach you how ships work normally before we get into cloaking, because this is a pretty involved mechanic. And the other thing, this is a place where Alex Davey did what a creative director should do. He said, you know what? We need more time to work on the core fundamentals. We're pushing cloaking into the first expansion. So there will be cloaking. I'm not going to say anything about why the first expansion needs cloaking, but you can maybe draw your own conclusions.
Hold on. I need to ask some more questions about this. How many lights do you see? Okay, all right.
There are four. Yeah. There are four.
That was excellent. All right. Well, then since you complied, we will no longer ask probing questions about the first expansions. Although I'm sure it probably won't be too long before they make their way to the interwebs.
In one of the first mock-ups of the ship displays I made, we had these like individualized station icons, which were way too fiddly. It was way too fiddly. But I mostly they were just like sort of generic icons, like a plant for the botany bay, or not the hydroponics bay, or a thing for the holodeck. But one of them, on the Jem'Hadar ship, I did an interrogation chamber, and it was just 4 little lights.
I love it.
That's not in the game. That was too complicated. We cut that.
We don't want to include psychological torture in the first launch of the game. Are you sure?
Yeah.
We thought we'd hold off on that for a while.
It definitely sounds like you guys are big Star Trek fans too. So I want to we'll hit some Star Trek questions later, but I want to stick to the game right now before I start gushing on Star Trek as a whole. From early, the earliest video when the game was previewed to the demo kit that's out there, it seems like the game is played on a 3x3 play area. Now, is this just for learn to plays, or is this like every game will always take place on a 3x3, or is there some variation there?
So I wouldn't say every game will always take place on a 3x3, because the way warp travel works, you get a lot of distance. We are definitely open to the idea of doing larger battles. Currently, I believe all of the scenarios we have are played on a 3x3. That is our standard board size, but it's not like cast in stone that we'll never do a bigger thing. Okay. We tested the game at various sizes. The big things we found were because of the way systems work. So we knew that warp travel had to be very important, and so there are systems that are these. You may have seen them in the preview kit scenarios and such. But if you have multiple systems in your sector, then moving between them requires warp. And you can't cross a system boundary at impulse. It's because it represents sort of a infinite the vast reaches of space. And if you're not in the system and you're in deep space, you can move around, but you can't get into the system or out of the system that way.
Yeah.
So because of that, we haven't found it to be extremely necessary for managing your ships. If you have 3 systems, you each have 3 ships, they spread out, you still end up with the board doesn't get super cramped. Mm-hmm. But I think it's absolutely possible we would explore 6x3, or I don't know, 6x6 would be pretty hard to reach the middle of the board. Sure. So probably not that. If
you're open to suggestions, I'd recommend 6x3, since so many of I would imagine a lot of your player base either has multiple 3x3s, or can that 2 people can pair one together, or there's a lot of people that have 6x3s from games like Armada or X-Wing Epic Play and things like that. There's certain other game companies like Games Workshop that every time they come out with a new edition, they come up with a whole new sizing scheme for their boards, and I'll say this, as a player, it becomes frustrating. It's like, oh, this one's 22 and 2/8 inches length by 33 and 0.67 centimeters. It's little, and it's harder for game stores to also keep the mats in stock if they're always different.
And game stores are a big reason that we wanted, at least out the gate, the game to play on a 3x3, because it is hard to get a 6x3 game into a game store, especially for any kind of event play.
Absolutely.
I mean, I was trying to play. We were playing Fantasy at a Old World, Warhammer Old World, at a game store the other day, and we did. They only had a couple tables that could support the board size for that, and we kind of had to cram in. And we made it work, but it was definitely like it can be hard to find space if it's much bigger than 3x3.
Absolutely, I think that speaks to a lot of foresight and also to a lot of experience in this industry, running into these issues where a lot of smaller stores are like, well, we can't really host a tournament for this game because it's too big, and we would only have like 2 tables, whereas you can double that for a 3x3. And frankly, like bigger games, as a big Armada player, a lot of the combat and conflict in those games ends up being condensed into a 3x3 at the end of the day anyway. So let's talk a little bit about one of the takeaways that people give, since I mentioned Armada. There's been some talk in the Armada community about that there's a lot of crossover, and folks will say things like, this game is not Armada. Don't think that this game is Armada. And I absolutely understand that. Having run through the demo kit, I can see that it can do so much more. But I sometimes feel like when you say that it's not Armada, you might try to be dismissing somebody who maybe they could have scratched that itch for. So I feel like, knowing only what I know, I feel like this game certainly can scratch the itch of an X-wing or Armada player, a player who's basically looking for, I want my ship to do battle with your ship. I want to do a battling. I want to have a battle scenario. Can basically. So what I would say to somebody is, it seems like that this game can be that, but is also so much more. I mean, how close am I off the mark there, or does that sound, is that close to, a way to describe it, or am I missing something by saying that?
We designed the game with battle as a core function. So you can always escalate to battle. There are many missions that focus on battles. And it is an important way to resolve a battle. I'll get into like levels of conflict in a minute, but so it's entirely possible, especially depending on like the missions you pick, to essentially just go for like a battle scenario. That said, we designed this game like we talked about, to try to be the most thematic Star Trek game we possibly could. And so there's extra dimensions to conflict in Star Trek that I think make it feel like what it feels. And so sometimes the way for you to win the mission may be for you to achieve a bunch of tests without necessarily trying to destroy your opponent's ships. Or sometimes you might even need to cooperate against a common foe. And that can actually happen, or a common challenge. The other thing I was going to say is, because of the way directives work in this game, and those are kind of your standing orders for your faction, and they can flip from a calm side to a hostile side. You also have things like teams and probes and things that you can launch that, even if our ships are not in conflict with each other, even if I might get penalized for shooting at your ship, our teams can maybe engage in ground combat. Or I can maybe shoot down your probe without consequences. So there are levels of battle. Yeah, there are levels of battle in this game too.
One of the things we wanted to make sure was, in the missions where battle is not guaranteed, the things that make battle fun in a miniatures game are still satisfied. So, for example, you have these 3 directives: combat, diplomacy, and exploration. Your combat directive dictates the terms under which you can and should engage in battle. So that's pretty straightforward with your ships. The exploration directive, dictates some things about how you form and control teams, and also how you can and should engage in combat with your teams. And your diplomacy directive gives you the ability to hail the other player. And hails can be a really interesting means of pressuring your opponent, even without attacking them directly. So you might be able to hail them to debuff their unit, or hi Shiloh, hello. Sorry, the dog. Or you might be able to use an ability that disrupts their tests or what have you. So there's a lot of things, coming from the games we've worked on and other games. We knew, in a miniatures game, positionality should matter. When positionality doesn't matter in a miniatures game, the game tends to get boring.
Sure.
So, we did a lot of things to make sure that positionality matters. Your arcs aren't just for your weapons. You also have arcs for your sensors and comms. Now, you do have all-around sensors and comms, because that's how they work, but they might be better in one arc, or cast ahead further in one arc. So, the way you have your ship positioned might affect whether you can, hail an enemy unit to put a debuff on them to prevent them from scoring a key objective or something. So we wanted to make sure that even when you're not fighting a battle, you're still engaged in a competitive activity that takes advantage of all the things that a miniatures battle game does well.
Okay, that's a great answer. Thank you guys. That was, and that kind of leads into like organized play. I have some questions about like plans for organized play and how that might work, but also it kind of goes into like the like battle cards and. Can you talk a little bit about how that will work right now, or what the plan is, or if it's still being developed, or how if I go to play in a tournament, for example, I imagine we're not going to be running a whole campaign.
So the plan, we're going to be providing some event guidance, and I know that WizKids has organized play plans. Those are still fully coalescing, I think. Slash, we probably shouldn't announce them without consulting with them.
Sure. No, understood.
But I know that it's something they're very interested in. It is something John is very personally interested in. He goes to Adepticon every year and runs big events just for fun. He's very interested in the game science of events, which I actually think is fantastic. And it's so great to have someone like directly on the team who does that. We worked with a lot of great OP people at Fantasy Flight, but one of the challenges we had was they were always so busy with running 50 different games. We were always so busy with work that it was often hard to directly coordinate. We did some collaboration, but it's nice to just have somebody on the team who's really interested in this. And for an event, the thought as it stands is this game is probably not. It is more akin to Armada than X-Wing in the length of time a game takes to play. It's not a fast-playing game. You're going to be at the table for 2-ish hours, probably. As you start to get good at it, you might get games done faster, but there's a lot of things that can, extend the time as well. It's a big, heavy, contemplative game. So you're not going to get in 8 rounds in a day.
Sure. Yeah.
Which means you're probably not looking at having a cut in quite the same way. So what we've suggested and what WizKids seems interested in doing is very much an event-focused OP scene, where rather than it being, sort of a, card game style tournament scene, it's more event-oriented. And it plays a little bit more like, the Armada tournaments did back when Fantasy Flight ran Armada tournaments, where it is a tournament, but there aren't enough rounds to have a, there are only 3 or 4 rounds. And what WizKids really wants to lean on, and I think it's a good idea, is story stuff that over the course of the event, a story will unfold. So even though you're not playing a full campaign, maybe you play 3 games, but there's some story stuff that happens. And maybe some of those events even go back to your home campaign in some way.
Oh, okay. That sounds really interesting, and that's a great way to kind of tease possible future content, because that starts the little hamster in my brain, churning that wheel even more. So let me talk about something else for those type of events, or for most battles, and I'm sure this is going to be an answer that varies widely, but it boils down to number of ships. When I first saw this game, I noticed that the card, your ship card was a little bit bigger than ship cards for other games that I've played, but also I don't have quite as many upgrades to kind of extend the table space. But still, I was a concern of mine, how many ships do you really foresee people running for a typical game of Star Trek Into the Unknown? Is it just going to be like your 1 to 3, or can it go higher than that? And what is typical, and maybe what are some of the the outliers there?
So the first answer I would say is a lot of that is dictated by the mission. Missions dictate the number of units that you can bring, although there will also potentially be rules to support escalating up the number of ships that you can have. Because of the nature of the core set, the missions in the core set are all built around between 1 and 3 ships, but there are also other supporting units that you can have, such as teams, such as shuttlecraft. Now, as the game goes on, as the game line goes on, and people want to play bigger games, there'll be opportunities for more ships in a game. And I think that kind of gets a little bit into how we designed the activation system and how officers work. Because as you scale up your fleet, you only have your 5 core officers, and then you are given extra officers for each additional ship, but they only increase incrementally. So the number of activations you're going to have, even as your fleet size goes up, is going to just increase mathematically, if you will, instead of it doesn't multiply.
Okay, and you can't run a ship with no officers on it, I'm assuming.
You can.
can.
You can,
Oh,
but
okay.
it's only going to have one action that it can take during the standby phase.
Oh, because you yes, because you're tapping those officers. You're using those officers to to take all these actions before that, and then the standby action is not nearly as strong as being able to do you know
Right.
having basically having a fully crewed ship is going to be a tremendous advantage.
Yep.
Yeah, and you're so yeah, you're given one officer at the start of the game, per ship. We have these line officers who, if you're getting transfer officers, you actually replace line officers with them. So you and your opponent will always start the game with the same number of officers, same number of activations. We felt that was very important based on some past learnings and such. Now, if you start losing officers, getting them captured or blown up, that is bad. Don't try not to let that happen.
Okay, and so don't want to get my crew captured and killed. Okay, that's
Yeah.
expert tips from the source right there.
I should say same number of. Well, you'll have the same number of ships in most missions too. There might be some cases where one person might be up one ship, but that's standby activations, which you point out are a little weaker.
Okay. I did want to talk about list building, but we already got that. For people who have been itching for this game, because we heard about it, and I think initially it was supposed to come out in April, and there's been some delays. Do you guys know what the estimated timeline for release is? What are we looking at?
Last we've heard is this fall.
Okay.
It seems like that should be on track, but who knows in this crazy world we live in?
Yeah, I think we've learned over the past couple of years that delays are happening across all kinds of industries, and
another boat could get stuck in a canal.
Yes. So we're not going to hold you to anything, but hopefully it's this fall.
We really hope so.
I hope so. I absolutely. Is there also? Do you know how long you guys are expecting in between like waves of expansions and stuff? Is this like a once per year thing, or is there kind of a rough estimate on what you guys think it's going to be?
We can't give you a definite number right now for how closely it's going to follow on, but we are working on expansion plans now.
Okay.
Yeah. And so I mean, I think the release cadence, because these exploration packs are pretty big, we hope that they'll tide people over for a while. So the release cadence is going to be quite a bit slower than say an attack wing, which I looked it up. An attack wing had 30 waves, which is just incredible. I don't think X-wing even had 30 waves.
That's a lot.
This is not going to be that quite as fast a release cadence in terms of like new products dropping, because each thing is more involved and has more stuff in it as opposed to just being a few ships. Which, not that designing a ship for a flight path game is easy, but
Sure.
it is certainly easier to get all the content put together for a single ship clam pack than a box with a lot of stuff in it.
Sure. Is there any questions that you guys people probably ask you questions about this game all the time? Is there any questions that you wanted somebody to ask you that nobody's asked, or is there anything like important that I haven't asked yet that you think is like, why aren't you asking about the big thing? Like, is there that one thing that's like really important that we haven't touched on, or that people never ask you?
Well, high level, one thing that you didn't ask about that I expected you might is Galaxy class saucer separation.
That is, you know what? I skipped right over that. Yeah, that's a. I talked about this earlier, and I think I must have skipped over it. So yes, that looks awesome. From the very first preview, that it was one of the things that you guys touted. How does that work? How and the fact that it's included from the beginning is very, very cool. And of course, I'm not gonna lie, it makes me think about other ships that separate into even more even more than two pieces. But yeah, how does this saucer separation work?
We knew that was a thing we wanted from day one, and to WizKids full credit, like they really helped support us and make that happen. To just boil it down to basics, it's an ability that a Galaxy class has. It's right on the ship display. You take an action, you can launch the saucer section, you assemble that, and you detach it from the model. You assemble it, put it on its own base, you place it in the play area within restrictions, and then the saucer section goes off and operates as its own unit. It's got a card, so it's not the same level of complexity as a starship with a ship display, but it's kind of runs like a mega-sized shuttlecraft. And then your the star drive section, you add a card to that, and then it operates like a normal ship in the game, but it also has some new caps and restrictions on what it can do.
Now, do you have the option to reform?
Yes.
Okay. Now here's a curveball. If I'm running 2 Galaxy class, can they reform with each other's saucer section?
Fascinating.
Yes.
I think
Guarded, yes.
I
Guarded,
think yes. Yeah, I'm pretty sure they can.
All right.
I think they can.
That could be a really interesting way to do like a crew transfer. I don't know if the crew
Yeah.
Well, you can, but you can also always transport crew.
Oh.
So
yeah, but
yeah,
I'm going to do it the fancy way. I'm going to be like Picard. No, Riker, do it manually. I want to see you do it. Like, wasn't Picard kind of like a little bit of a jerk in that first episode? He was just like, no, Riker, I'm putting you on the spot. Maybe
the characters maybe hadn't quite gelled into the characters we exactly know. So he's definitely like, I'm hard. I'm a hard captain.
Yes. Oh no, that was awesome. Thank you so much. That was a really great answer. I love to hear it. I've got a pitch for you. Like, let's just say you got another expansion or like maybe a mirror universe kind of thing. A mission where Cedo Jaxa survived. All right, so that's not a super deep cut, but a minor deep cut for TNG fans.
I know who you're talking about.
Yeah. I think it could be a fun one. I mean, and that kind of goes into maybe maybe an extra question is like, since you're designing missions, how do they have to all be like fully canon, or are you allowed to kind of make some, or how much can you say about that process on like how much creative control you have on, hey, we're gonna decide that this is an option that can happen in this mission, even if it's not something that could happen in a show.
Well, I think Max did an amazing job of designing like a lot of how the mission system works.
Thank you.
It's probably a good chance to talk about the 2 fundamental types of missions. So there are story missions, which are the published campaign style, like long form missions that you're going to get out of the campaign book. And then there are also missions that you assemble from cards. And those are called incident missions. And so story missions so far we take a lot of inspiration from what has happened in Star Trek shows, because we're trying to parallel the bigger story of the Dominion War. Incident missions are kind of more like we take inspiration from things that happened in episodes we all remember, but we chop them into parts. Because the way this game takes place in acts, we can have mix and match between your overture, your situation, which is like the different factors that, like, especially factors with the environment, and your complication, which is the Act 2 reveal.
That's really interesting to me. Now, I had read very little about the incident missions, but I knew that was a thing. Is that if I were going to just do a standoff mission, like I'm going to a store, it's game night, and I'm just going to meet up with some people who are playing Star Trek Into the Unknown because it's quickly become one of the most popular miniature games on the planet overnight after release.
Here's hoping.
Yeah, and and so we're going to show up, and is that kind of how you envision like that local meet and play kind of mission? Would it be with incident missions? And if so, do we each prepare a deck of incident missions, or is it like one common deck and it's randomized at the start?
Yeah, so there's a couple ways to do it. So for the situation and the complication, situation and overture and situation, you're going to sort of agree with your opponent what you want to play. And so you might say, oh, I've played this one recently. Let's play these 2 together or something. Or maybe one of you picks one, the other picks the other. For the complication, though, the deck of options is organically generated by the situation and overture you picked. Each of those has a couple of tags attached to it, like mystery or or intrigue or conflict, I think. Conflict, yeah. Anyway, so there's a bunch of those tags, and then those tags will generate the deck you have. You'll shuffle that deck together, and then for the complication, you'll each draw 2, look at one, put one down, and then the other one is the complication that you know about, your complication. And then over the course of the game, there's an influence track that can move back and forth that you can use to determine which complication comes to light as the mid-episode twist.
Oh, that sounds really cool. That's awesome. I'm really excited to try these out. I don't know if I'm gonna like the incident missions more than actually doing the campaign, because I sometimes struggle with like having to find the same group of people that will meet up each week and do it. But how can you say how many missions the campaign currently is, or is it fluctuate?
So there are 4 story missions in this campaign, each of which branches. So each mission not only has an overture, but it also has 2 complications. And then when you have completed the campaign, you can use incident missions to keep going. So they also slot in, but you are essentially like, you have left the major story arc episodes and you are now writing additional episodes.
Oh, okay. That's really cool. There's a lot of different like ship types that I've seen. You guys have the capital ships, which are like the Galaxy class. How many different ship types are there in there? Because it looks like there's possibly some that we haven't seen yet.
How many ship types are there in the core set? There are 5.
Okay. And I wanted to also ask about the core set. Like, what are we getting in the core set for people who haven't seen all the spoilers yet?
So the ships in the core set are the Defiant, the Galaxy class. Has the third one been revealed for the Federation?
It's the Constellation class.
Constellation class hasn't been revealed. I wasn't 100% sure about that, if that had been revealed or not. And then for the Dominion, you get the Jem'Hadar battlecruiser and the 2 Jem'Hadar fighters.
That looks really cool. And it looks like you guys have different sizes too, because the Constellation looks like it's on sort of a medium size base versus the Defiant, which is smaller, and then the Galaxy, which is significantly larger. Are those? We have any other base sizes planned, like ultra large, or anything that anything you're able to drop just yet? Like maybe a Deep Space Nine size base.
I was gonna say it would be cool. Let's hope we get there.
Okay.
Yeah. In addition to the ships,
how many lights do you see? What sizes of bases are we going to get?
I'll talk.
All right.
In addition to the ships, you also get all the tools you need. You get rulers, all of the system boundary markers, so you can create the systems. You get dice, 12 dice, and you get all of the punchboard tokens you need. And that also includes like all the different unit types, including like, if you play the intro game, you see that like photon torpedoes are fired and they're an independent unit. That's also things like escape pods and probes and teams and shuttlecraft, as well as all of the tracking tokens you need to play, like which system am I in and who do I have a lock on, those kinds of things, victory points. Okay. And you get a lot of cards.
Awesome. Yeah, no, it's I can't wait. I'm very excited for it, and hopefully the fall gets here sooner, for numerous reasons, not just because I want this heat to go away, but for Star Trek. You guys talked a little bit about trying to do stuff from episodes, so I want to take this time to kind of talk about your Star Trek episodes. And do you guys have a favorite Star Trek episode, or if not, do you have an episode that maybe really stands out, especially as it applies to like development of this game? Now, I know you guys have already mentioned some, but there's an opportunity to mention maybe another one.
Yeah, so I'm definitely the kind of guy, I can't, I could not give you a single favorite episode of any of these series, but because I just have too many. But like I mentioned, like Redemption Part 2 and Part 1, like kind of gave me a lot of inspiration for like how that it was one of the things where we talked about wanting officers to be really front and center, and that felt very Star Trek.
Mm.
Uh, I think with the way teams operate, we took a lot of inspiration from episodes like To the Death,
Mm.
which is a DS9 episode. I'm trying to think of some other good ones, but the way that like a team is like a number of people, and then you put an officer in to lead the team, and that was a really important thing to us. And that teams like Jem'Hadar raid places. I think that happens in several episodes,
Yeah.
and that was something we wanted to like have be a part of the game. Is like I can actually beam a team over to your ship to do things. Um,
And do you have to have a Jem'Hadar leading Jem'Hadar, or can you have like a Vorta leading the Jem'Hadar team or something like that?
yes,
Yeah.
yeah. So like the team is an independent unit, and it can operate on its own.
Mm.
But if you add officers to it, it gets better.
Mm.
And so like you can definitely have your Vorta lead a diplomatic team or a combat team. They're going to do better if it's a diplomatic team.
Okay.
Um, so yeah, I think the answer is like yes. Like teams are they're a pretty simple unit, but you can do a lot of things with them, and they're a very important unit for the game.
Absolutely. Um, Max, do you have a favorite episode or particular piece of inspiration from Star Trek that?
Yeah, that's tough. I mean, I think one of the episodes we talked about, it is not my all-time favorite episode. I don't even think it's my all-time favorite episode of the original series, although it's pretty high up there. But oh my god, I'm blanking on the name.
It's
Mike, it's the
Tribbles.
one. It's Trouble with Tribbles. It is a great episode.
The Tribble expansion will be out.
You know,
in quarter
Trials
four.
and Tribulations is a strong contender for my actual favorite episode. But no, it's the first meeting with the Romulans.
Balance of Terror.
Balance of Terror, yes, of course. Of course, I couldn't think of it on the spot, but yeah. So Balance of Terror, we spent a lot of time talking about that episode in particular and saying like, okay, we really want the factors of this space battle to feel relevant. When they use the comet trail to try to suss out the position of the cloaked ship. Obviously the Battle of the Mutara Nebula in Wrath of Khan was a huge inspiration. And then as we sort of thought about larger battles, Deep Space Nine was obviously where we looked, because that's where we get so many of the the huge battles. You get Sacrifice of Angels and episodes like that. And we wanted to make sure the game could handle both, the one-on-one, almost Horatio Hornblower-esque ship duel, and also the big, big sci-fi extravaganza engagement.
No, that sounds awesome. I noticed ramming is a thing that seems like it can happen. And of course, that makes me think of Deep Space Nine. I don't remember the name of the episode, but the Galaxy class goes in there, and with the overconfident captain, he's just like, oh, well, these little ships can't do anything to us. And just to find out how wrong he was, But it seems like that just about any situation that that I've run through with just looking at the preview kit. I can find an episode that that it speaks to, and I think that just is really, really cool. Gosh, I think I'm just about out of questions at this point. Is there anything you think that Oh, Michael, I didn't get to you as far as any other questions that you wish that somebody would have asked you, or is there anything else?
Yeah. Actually, the question about like episodes, that was one of them.
Okay.
Because like there's a lot of. I'm actually really glad you mentioned that episode. Like that's literally called the Jem'Hadar.
Yeah.
It's the first appearance of the Jem'Hadar. That episode informed a lot about faction design. Like that ramming ability is in there because that scene tells you a lot about the whole ethos of the Jem'Hadar.
For sure. Yeah.
And broadly speaking, I think that ramming ability actually speaks to a thing in this game, which is when we were brought on, the spec was very much that like we want this to be a game that oozes Star Trek feel, and one of our pillars was kind of like, well, if it happens in Star Trek, we want it to be able to happen in this game. Okay. And not everything, obviously, but like, so many things.
No Beverly Crusher with the ghost candle.
Yeah, I don't think we're gonna have ghost candle rules or anything like that. But
That could be an organized play event, maybe.
that could be an organized play reward or something. But with ramming, it was like, well, we could include a rule for ramming. We could not include a rule for ramming. We don't necessarily want ramming to be a default option. Any ship can do it at any time. But we do want it to be covered, and we want it to be covered from the start of the game because it's relevant enough times circumstantially that we want it to be in here. And so when you're showing this game to a new person, it is a very complicated game. There's no point burying the lead on that. It's not simple. You're not going to learn it in 5 minutes. But one very positive experience I've had is when I've showed it to people who are big Star Trek fans, they've usually said, "Oh, can I, form a team and can I put a team together and transport them down to the planet?" And I say, "Yeah, look on the shipboard here. You use this station to do this, you use this station to do that, and then you send your team down to the planet." And their eyes just light up. It's like, "Oh, can I shoot down their probe?" Yeah, you can. And we really just wanted it to be like, it is not a simple game, but we want it to be intuitively familiar. And that, things make sense to Star Trek. And if you think you should be able to do it, you probably can, or you can do something like it.
That said, you're not going to be interacting with all of the rules all of the time. They're going to come up when situationally, and our big hope, or one of the things we really want people to do, is when you get the game home and you pop it open, and you play that first learning mission, we want you to then crack open the campaign guide and play those missions, because those step up the complexity.
Okay.
So that you can learn the parts of the game as you go and have a good time and learn the campaign mode. And then once you've graduated, the academy, so to speak, then you can jump into the deep end, play with the cards, and then you're going to encounter everything, but mostly when someone makes a choice.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. I think that's a really good way to put it, is that the rules are wide, but you're not going to encounter all of them every mission. Again, some missions, both players might decide a firefight is not the way they want to go, or a big space entity might show up and attack both of you, and your fight gets broken up because you have to work together to not both lose. So there's a lot of different ways it can go down, but you won't necessarily be having to balance all of the complexity at all times. It's there when you need it.
Okay.
I might never launch a shuttle in a particular game, but the option is there.
Awesome. Now, shuttles brings up an interesting thing, and I know we're closing in on the end, but one thing we don't see in Star Trek as often, but still sometimes there, is like the smaller attack craft, like almost like that Luke Skywalker and his X-wing, kind of doing the bombing run. You don't see that very much in Star Trek, but it has happened a couple of times. Is that something that like shuttles can do in this game, or is that something that you guys have thought about already, or is that like maybe something too far out to get into?
We actually thought about this a lot.
Okay.
Started from the idea that shuttles are utility craft for missions, for tasks. Starfleet ships don't operate like carriers with lots of little craft that they shoot off for battle. That's not generally what happens, but small craft appear in battles, and you can always use them for things. And so we designed them according to that. And there is actually like a limit to how many you can field at one time. That's there to prevent a bit of overwhelm, and also because in most of the kind of missions we're portraying, it doesn't seem necessary. That said, in the future, as we get to like larger scale battles where some of those things do, you see more of an appearance, we definitely would have ways to represent that in game. But right now we're sticking with shuttles and runabouts.
Okay, fantastic.
And shuttles are combat capable. They're not especially dangerous against most ships most of the time, but a shuttle in the right position can absolutely damage any ship, which we do actually see. There are a bunch of times in Voyager where the Delta Flyer, which is Tom Paris's sweet souped up muscle car shuttle, but at the end of the day, it's still basically a shuttle. But there are times where there are times where we see it, go toe to toe briefly, and it's always running away, but briefly with larger ships. It's not quite as much like a setting where the absolute poundage of a ship decides what role it can play in a battle. But obviously, a shuttle is not going to want to be on the receiving end of salvo from a Jem'Hadar battlecruiser either.
Yeah, no, that's a real good answer. I think, and it's cool that you, by doing that, if you wanted to do, a dedicated carrier at some point, it sounds like you have the mechanics available to be able to do that. I off and on I'll play the game Star Trek Online that they've really spread out into like every conceivable type of thing at that point, but they have a whole line of carriers in there, and it's just like there's one of my ships launched a whole squadron of Delta Flyers, and I'm like, that doesn't exist yet, but sure, why not? So, but it's cool that you guys have kind of you've thought about so many things with this one. Is there anything that you didn't expect that you were going to have to design that kind of crept its way into the design process, or something you didn't have to like oh, how are we going to account for this because something that kind of showed up late or
I think from my end we more did the opposite. There were things we winnowed out. We tried to get it down to game design is usually a task of trying to whittle things down to being the most elegant they can be. We often chose theme and what we hope is fun over elegance on over pure whittled to the bone elegance. But there were a lot of mechanics that did not make it in too. A lot of stuff ended up on the cutting room floor, as is always the case with the design.
Sure. You can't take out everything.
You can't and should not put every idea in a game.
That's fair.
We don't really need cetacean ops.
Yeah.
Do you?
Although we could, if we ever get to do the Cerritos, I'm definitely putting one of those beluga whales in.
I really wanted to ask more about Lower Decks, and the art style too, and because frankly, awesome. I think you've got this awesome art that we've seen so far with this game, and it's kind of like a photorealistic kind of style, and then it would be so hilarious to just have animated characters just show up as like, it's Lower Decks, just deal with it. That's the way it is, but, or however it ends up happening. But I think there was another game that was spoiled recently by WizKids that looks like it's mixing art styles, and I think that's just wonderful. So either way, whatever ends up happening, it sounds exciting. Out of the core set, favorite officer, anything that stands out that people should look out for? Any recommendations? Who to bring? Oh, I see the eyes that they're thinking. There's good options there.
Worf is really good at ground combat.
Okay.
But also he's like pretty good at shooting at other ships. I love Worf in general. So we were gonna do a fun Worf, no matter what. I don't know. I think we both really like Wei Yun.
I was going to talk about Wei Yun. I'm going to put as many Jeffrey Combs into this game as they let me.
Thank you. That's awesome.
Wei Yun 4 is the first, but hopefully not the last. But 2, I really like the space we have for the Jem'Hadar characters, where they kind of, or not the Jem'Hadar, the Vorta characters, where they kind of encourage you to play opposite to what the Jem'Hadar want to do, which is playing up that natural strife that we see, where they have a lot of diplomacy related abilities. And so you have these big guns, you have these Jem'Hadar characters who are very capable in combat, but you're almost definitely also going to have some Vorta characters, and they give you a pretty good incentive to be diplomatic. And so they're this very interesting sort of conflict within the heart of this faction of oh, like we could shoot first and maybe it would work out well for us, but do we want to? Well, maybe we can get more advantage out of not doing that. And I really like that because that paradox is such a thing. It is one of the things that makes the Dominion such a fun faction for storytelling.
Oh, awesome. I noticed. Speaking of the Dominion, one of the cards in the preview kit mentions founders. So can we expect to see changelings in the core set?
I think you can expect to. Well, I mean, how would you know?
Well, they could all be. That's the best answer, Max, dude. That's a very good one. Thank you.
I think that the succinct answer is yes.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. This has been a really great interview. I think I'm running out of questions at the moment, and I know as soon as I hang it up, I'm gonna be like, wait a second, I should have asked this and I should have asked that. But I guess we'll just have to, we'll have to get together and we'll have to get together next year or sometime after release and then talk about what else is coming in the future. But all right, if folks want to find out more about you guys and your work, where can they go?
So, I can be found on various social media platforms, whatever, Twitter X, I guess, or whatever it's called these days. I'm not on there much anymore. The main place to find me is I have a blog that I'm actually about to do a couple blog posts for that I have been procrastinating but have made some progress on recently. And including one about just sort of my time on X-Wing, just some personal reflections on what I got out of the game. And that's just maxbrooke.com.
Okay, we'll put links down in the video description. Great. And Michael, any plugs?
Not at this time. For me, the usual suspects: Board Game Geek and oh man, why can I not think about it now? But yeah, I'm in the process of upping my social media presence again.
It's a blessing and a curse. I find the more people can reach out and touch you, the more inappropriate things that happen. But it's always fun. And the game is also we'll put a link in the video description below. We can find it over at WizKids. There's a lot of there's ever growing information that's slowly but surely being trickled out from WizKids. I don't know. I've heard that stores are starting to take pre-orders as well, which is very exciting because once the stores and the distributors and everybody lined up the pre-order system, like it feels like it's one step closer to reality. It's like we're not on the holodeck anymore. Are holodecks in this? I would imagine that doesn't say. There probably wouldn't be holodecks in this game, right?
We did experiment with that early version I was telling you about that had all the custom station icons. Sure. The holodeck was on that list. That got left on the cutting room floor, but we could do a complication about somebody's shipboard entertainment system going rogue.
Yeah, I mean that would be so, especially TNG. I mean, there's holodeck episodes and everything, but I think TNG kind of really, with Moriarty and everything, they kind of just stole the crown for holodeck episodes.
I think it will be an if, not a when, or a when, not an if, of some kind of mission about somebody getting trapped in a literary milieu.
I would love to do a Vic Fontaine card.
Oh, very cool.
That would be good.
That actually speaks to another really great episode of Nog doing his rehabilitation with Vic Fontaine.
We went on a podcast and talked about that episode.
I heard that interview. That's probably why that's in the top of my head right now too, because
maybe we should drop a link to that too. That's a place people can see more about us. And
yes,
about the game.
Absolutely.
Out of contrast.
We'll drop a name, right? A link in the video description below. So there's gonna be a lot of links. So be sure to check those out. Max and Michael, thank you guys so much for coming out and talking about Star Trek Into the Unknown. Definitely looking forward to it, and I guess I think that's going to be any closing remarks. How many?
Thank you. I always enjoy coming on here and talking with you.
I appreciate it. I have a final question. How many lights? All right.
Well, I only see two right now.
You guys are also the other two lights. You're the inner light, which is my little.
We're the inner light. Okay.
Another plug for one of my favorite Star Trek episodes. All right, that is going to do it for today's video. I want to thank you guys all for watching. Big thanks to my patrons. You guys are amazing as well. May the force be with you. Live long and prosper. Be excellent to each other. Party on, dudes, and always wash your socks.